our panelists for joining us here today. Here is our sort of plan for this conversation. We are, I'm going to provide some quick introductory remarks as we get going, and then we're really going to get into it with our panelists. My hope is to kind of, while I'm facilitating and moderating, I'm really not the featured event. Our awesome team of panelists have lots of points of reflection to add to this conversation around climate and how Vermont advances creative solutions to climate change. Let me, I think actually what I'd like to do before I give my little introductory remarks is give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves because they're here and it feels funny not to do that. So why don't I call on you all to give just a really quick introduction, who you are, sort of the work you're doing, and you know, 1 or 2 minutes about sort of how it connects to the climate economy and climate change. So I am going to call out Kristin Carlson from Green Mountain Power to get us started with that. And everybody, go Kristin.
Great, it's great to be here. I did recognize a lot of the names of folks joining. It would be nice to be in person, but it's great that the event is moving forward. So I'm Kristin Carlson. I live in Montpelier and have a 9-year-old daughter, and am really excited to be tackling climate change in Vermont. With my work at Green Mountain Power, I really lead all external and strategic work for the company. So a lot of our customer community facing work. I've been here for about 7 or 8 years. And our mission is to really create a closer connected and more empowered system for customers, because we know that we are seeing the impacts of climate change here in Vermont. And for those of you who get our press releases or follow what we're doing, we're sort of on a pace now of pretty much a big announcement every week at this point, because there is so much that can happen here. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more, but it is at the core of everything we do every day in terms of how do we create a system that is more renewable, more reliable, and as a virtue of doing that, it's also going to help the local and regional economies. So this is a passionate topic of mine, as Jon knows, so I will stop here because I think that's my minute or two, but just really excited to be here because it's the work of our life and it's the most important work in progress we can make. And just to let folks know, a new greenhouse gas report, carbon emissions report came out that I'm sure all of you have looked at, and it really shows that the top sources of carbon pollution in Vermont are transportation and heating, accounting for 70%. So really excited about electric vehicles and other ways to decarbonize in Vermont using our clean electric backbone of the system.
Thank you, Kristin. All right, Chris.
Hello, good afternoon. Glad to be here. Very humbled to have been asked, and hope that this works out, that I can add something to what you all have to say. That's a hard act to follow. My name is Chris Blanchard, and I am a co-owner of Bristol Electronics, which is a business that my father started in 1972. We're coming up on a big anniversary and are excited about that. At this time, we are primarily solar installers and heat pump installers with some backup battery installations, and really try to include our customers and their families and include children in installations when our guys are on scene, because we feel like they are the next generation and they're going to lead us into battling the climate change and helping this world be a better place. So yeah, I think we're really connected to this topic because we are on the ground installing solar systems for homes and very, very small businesses and helping them make a difference in their carbon footprint.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Paul, and then Marina after that.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Paul Hines, and I lead a company called Packetized Energy. And our mission at Packetized is to enable the future of clean energy, making it clean, affordable, and resilient for all people. And so we do that by providing software and hardware technology for utilities and for the electricity markets to help balance the grid in real time with lots of renewable energy. And so, you know, I really appreciate the work that like Kristin is doing to enable that from a utility perspective, and Chris is doing to get more renewable energy in the system. And so we're doing that helping to provide software and hardware systems that make it all kind of fit together nicely.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And Marina McCoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marina McCoy, and I'm the founder and CEO of Waste Free Earth, where we are reinventing society's relationship with waste. I'm kind of the only one that's not doing energy. I'm more in the waste sector, but we build zero waste strategies that are community-based that help all businesses become more sustainable and reduce and eliminate their overall waste consumption. It's really important for us. We feel that waste tends to be an afterthought. We really like to go in, identify the key waste contributors, and then with our programs, since they're community-based, more businesses can hop on board, because a big reason why the programs aren't successful is that businesses tend to have little bandwidth to really make them themselves. So we come in and make a system that everyone could kind of take a part of instead of doing it on their own. And full disclosure, I fidget a lot, so I'll be moving around. I just like to give a warning if you see me moving around on that aspect. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited about this.
Awesome. We really appreciate all of you joining us for this conversation. So I want to just talk a little bit about Proposition 3 as a way to tee up this conversation. You know, at the Council on Rural Development, we've actually been sort of engaging in a large statewide conversation around the climate economy for a number of years now. We actually hosted 2 big summits down at Vermont Tech back in like 2015 and 2016. And then we hosted this big sort of nationally focused conference up in Burlington at Davis Center called the Catalysts of the Climate Economy back in 2017. And one of the things that we hear from Vermonters and is core to this proposition is the framing of climate change not just as a threat. And that isn't to minimize the fact that it is a threat. It is an existential threat. My 11-year-old daughter was just minutes ago talking to me about, like, if she could choose, she would actually have COVID forever if she could make climate change go away, right? That's an indication of like how much even an 11-year-old is carrying a sense of what this means for our future. And it is also an opportunity for Vermont as we think about the strategies to tackle climate change. Those strategies are both important in a frame of doing our part to solve a global problem, but also in terms of improving our quality of life and creating economic opportunity. And when we talk about that economic opportunity, we mean it in a bunch of different ways. We mean a place where people can grow businesses, innovative businesses and jobs. And we have panelists who really represent that. But we also think about the economy in terms of like your kitchen table trying to balance your checkbook. And the heating bills, the electricity bills, every time you go to the gas pump to fill up your car, those add up, and those particularly add up for Vermonters who are in that sort of middle class and sort of that socioeconomic spectrum where those energy costs are a significant portion of what they have to carry every month. And so part of what I think we want to talk about today is how do we think about addressing those needs of Vermonters, growing our economic opportunity, doing our part, and also, and this is a little nod, I saw a question in the chat from Jim Stiles, who I work with, thinking about how are we resilient communities? The world is going to change because of climate change. There's no longer any question about that. How is Vermont positioning itself in the best possible way in that changing world? How are we building a resilient grid, a resilient food system, a resilient waste system? Because you know what, we can't afford to extract and throw away all of these things, right? So So those are what we're trying to think about with this proposition, is what are the levers for Vermont to really push forward in this work. And so maybe I'll sort of stop there with my introduction, because I think we need to start getting into the nitty gritty here of this conversation. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of tee up a first question, which is, for the four of you, as you think about future opportunity and how Vermont positions itself well, what do you see as one key strategy that will make a difference? Maybe that's a regulatory piece, a policy piece, a market piece, a culture shift piece. What do you see as something that Vermont can do to help build that path forward? So you guys can just kind of unmute, start talking, wave your hand, or I can call on people, but I'll just tee that up for y'all.
So I'll jump in and just follow on what Kristin said about, if our goal here, which I think it is to eliminate carbon emissions from Vermont, the number one thing that we can do is to electrify transportation and heating. Those are the two things that are producing, almost all of the carbon emissions in Vermont. And we need to just, get incredibly aggressive about electrifying all of the fuel oil in everybody's basement and making it really easy for everybody to adopt electric vehicles. That creates some new challenges, like managing the grid with lots of new electric load. But, we've got awesome utilities like GMP and others, and, we're working on helping to make that easier too. And I just think that that's a solvable problem, but we need to first electrify everything, because our electricity is pretty darn clean, and we just need to start doing it.
All right, others who has something to add to that?
So I have something to add, and I kind of touched on it in my introduction, in that I think it's really important that we educate our youth and get them very involved in every level, not just going into the classroom and having the teacher say, net, you got to do this, but living in our communities and making examples of what to do. I think that as we are trying to hire people into our industry, we don't always find that the youth have had interactions with renewable energy and with composting and taking care of trash and sorting trash out. All of that, it's a big picture. And I think when I read through the documentation that you sent, I was impressed and excited about all that you included, because I think there's a huge picture here, but making sure that we're educating our youth in what's going on and what can be done, and getting them involved in advancing technologies that will make it even better.
I also think one of the strengths that Vermont has is that we are small. And so although we all have probably different ways, and there's a pretty active chat going on, and a lot of folks are really passionate that conservation needs to be a part of it. And of course it's a part of it. Vermont has an efficiency utility that has been a tremendous support system in terms of helping here as well. In terms of efficiency, weatherization is a huge piece of it. The $7+ billion budget that just passed state government includes a lot of provisions for weatherization, and that's really critical. But I think in Vermont, one of the things that is sort of embedded in our culture at GMP, and I think is embedded in a lot of Vermonters, is that we can get it done here. So, you can have Paul Hines grow his business here. You can have Chris and Marina grow their businesses here and do it in a really positive way that helps the environment. And so I think in Vermont, because we are small, because you can get the decision makers at the table, because we grocery shop with our US senators at times, that we can get this done. And I think speed is of the essence here. This is not the time for reports. We know the planet is on fire. We know the impacts of climate change that are happening, and we know leveraging innovations like the Paul's company has, the innovations are here. And so a lot of times Green Mountain Power gets a lot of recognition for the work we're doing, because utilities across the country are really slow to act. And so I think speed is something that we have here, Jon, that I would hope that we continue to build the momentum in terms of progress and alignment on how to help on climate change, because we have the tools that can make a difference. And we've learned a lot during COVID-19. I agree, we don't want to just shed everything we've learned during the pandemic in terms of what was able to happen with carbon reduction, with people working from home, a lot of ways that we can help the environment. But Vermont is a rural state. Folks do need to drive, folks do need to heat their homes. So how can we do it in a more efficient way, a way that is accessible to everybody, so that are our rebates for electric vehicles robust enough for low to moderate income people? We know that when you drive electric versus fossil fuel, it costs only about $1 a gallon or so. So it is more affordable, but how do we make sure people can get into those vehicles? And again, I think it's speed, 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 because we don't have a lot of time here. And so that's why I'm excited this is one of the topics.
Marina, I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So coming from the waste side of things, we really believe at the source of climate change is waste. And I know that people tend to not think of it that way, but for us, everything is connected to waste. Like with the factories and their carbon emissions, like what are they producing? A lot of it is single-use waste or stuff that's made cheaply, like all of our electronics that then get transported, create more carbon emissions, and then either to the waste facility or to third world countries. So that's how we look at it, because we're very systems-based. We really want a more circular economy. So every time I say that we believe that waste is at the center of climate change, people really take a step back and are like, no, like why, like we don't believe that, but really everything is waste when you think about it. Like even when we're switching over to electrical vehicles, now we have the waste of the older cars. And for us as a company, that's where we try to go in and create those community-based systems of looking at the stuff that we already have on the planet. How can we tweak it to then turn that into an electrical vehicle instead of having all this waste? And where we feel that's missing from the conversation as well, people get so stuck on the carbon footprint that there's on Planet Money, they talk about how it may not be worth it to rinse out a peanut butter jar from a carbon footprint statement that like, oh, it's easier to throw it away. But then you're thinking about all the material that comes into it and where it was transported from and then where it's going to go. It's not looking at the whole picture. So that's why we don't like to just focus on the carbon footprint side of things. We like to have a full interdisciplinary look at it, bring in all the different factors, because it's not just one way or another. But again, that's where our systems come into play, where everyone could feed into it. And with us, the single-use products is a big factor. And again, you have those stats come out that like a cotton bag has to be used hundreds of times for it to be more carbon efficient than a single-use plastic bag, but it's not thinking about the whole life cycle of it. If the plastic bag is going to end up in the waterways, then the fish are going to eat it, and then it biomagnifies within them, and then it biomagnifies within us if we're eating the fish. And with Act 148, we are very passionate about. We wish that it was more binding. It's more so of an honor code. A couple years ago when I touched base with Jon, we were creating, well, we already created a reusable trailer where we got 7,000 festival attendees in Lyons, Colorado on fully reusable plates, utensils, bowls, cups. So that way there was no single-use products. We don't believe in compostables just because of the carbon footprint of it, and then plus your stance on GMO cropping, monocropping, that's essentially what they're all made of, and it actually takes more oil to produce the, sorry, like I'm so passionate about waste. It takes more oil to produce the compostable products than just regular plastics, and we were really trying to make that happen to get all the events in Burlington on a reusable system, but people were still thinking that compostable products were the solution. And it's actually been beneficial for us working with Green Mountain Compost that they're no longer going to accept compostable products starting in January 2022. So now more people are trying to look at the reusable system. So we're very excited to set up reusable systems for events and also a takeout system in Burlington. Long-winded answer, but
Well, Marina, let me ask a quick follow-up. You mentioned Act 148, which I don't think people know is the Universal Recycling Law, actually a pretty pioneering law passed in the state of Vermont a few years ago that even gets down to the household level in terms of requiring composting, no organics going into the waste stream. That's an example, though, of a policy coming from the state that then hopefully, ideally results in changes. And then you potentially as a business helping people navigate that change. So, so just curious to get a little sense of like Act 148, the Universal Recycling Law, is it a catalyst? How much does that bring people to your door to help solve sort of the waste challenge?
Yeah, it definitely brings people to our door. What really helped was that the compost facility said that they were no longer going to take compostable products more than actual Act 148, because people we moved from single-use plastics to then another single-use alternative, and people really didn't think about fixing the single-use problem. Like we have a consumption problem, convenience-based, but a lot of these reusable systems aren't new. We were doing it decades ago. It's just that we got so used to the single-use convenience lifestyle. But when recycling facilities and compost facilities start putting bans on certain products, on what they accept, that's where we see the biggest change, because now consumers don't really know what to do with it, or businesses. Right now, like I'm at Hula, and we're helping them more like strengthen their composting here, and then other businesses, because Act 148 happened and people were a little bit flustered with it, but now they're even more flustered because all these restaurants switched over to compostables, which was more expensive for them. And now they just don't know what to do, because do they go back to single-use plastic? So it's tricky, but it's a good step in the right direction. I just wish it was more binding, because I know multiple businesses and individuals that don't do it.
That's helpful. You know, I'm seeing people pose a lot of questions in chat. Q&A you should see right next to chat on your window down below, or you might have to click on the more down below. The truth is, I'm kind of navigating both at this point, so I've kind of given in to the fact that the things have moved over to chat. But I'd encourage you, if you can, pose questions in Q&A. I'm going to do my best to keep track of those. Here's a question for all of you. I talked about the culture piece. There are statewide policies, but ultimately so much of this originates with individual choices. You know, it's time to put a new boiler in the basement because my old one died. I'm ready to buy a new car. I'm thinking about the next house I'm going to move into, or I'm making choices, even daily choices, right? We talk about conservation, about what trips am I going to make? Am I going to drive, or is there some other way to get there? How do you all think about how do we engage Vermonters effectively in this and sort of bring them along in this transition?
So that's something I think about all the time. And, you know, I'll just share our experience in terms of what's effective and what works. But I think one thing that's critical is you have to communicate it in a really clear way. And a lot of times, no matter what specialty folks have, education, energy, waste, there's a lot of jargon that goes along with it that can be very off-putting. So, you know, I always think about my mother who lives in Worcester, Vermont. And I think about like, how would I explain that to her who doesn't swim in this space all the time? So I think number one, it's make it accessible, because it is. And I think a lot of times when people use jargon, it's a defense, or it's because maybe they don't feel comfortable. And so number one, communicate it clearly. And I think also communicate the benefits. And so, for example, this isn't what quite at the issue, but one of the things with resiliency that GMP offers also along with other companies is the options of energy storage for folks. And, you know, when we started talking about energy storage, no one understood why they would want a battery in their homes. That wasn't a topic of conversation here. So we weren't coming into a saturated market. We had to start from an education standpoint. So again, now if you talk to a lot of our customers about batteries, battery storage, resiliency, they understand what that means. And so I think also talking about why is the person interested in doing this action? So is it because they're concerned about the climate? Is it because they're concerned about cost? And showing the benefit of taking this step that empowers them to make the decision, because Vermonters are really motivated and want to act and make these choices. And we have to make progress now because, as Jon said, people are making fossil fuel decisions that will lock them in for the next several decades. So when you have that person who is, I had a friend who was debating what to do with their old fossil fuel system, they went with wood pellet thanks to some incentives from state programs and Efficiency Vermont. Like, these are the points where we have to reach people when they're about to lock in a decision that has really dire carbon consequences, but also cost consequences, because we know that a lot of this clean electrification technology can actually be more affordable for folks.
Chris, I
could talk a lot about it, Jon, but I will I love hearing about everyone else, so I'm going to pause.
Chris, I wonder, like, you have this conversation with potential customers about solar, about heat pumps, about batteries and backups. Like, what do you find engages folks? How do those conversations go?
How do they go? I don't really know how to answer that question. People call and say, we're thinking about solar or heat pumps or batteries, and we set up a site check. Stephen goes out, gets all the details, comes back. I do up a quote that has a lot of options and go and sit down with people at their dining room tables or on their porch or wherever. And a solar quote delivery takes me 1.5 to 2.5 hours. There have been 6 occasions now where 6 hours later, I got up from the table not knowing that 6 hours went by, because these people just wanted to talk and understand and had questions. And it was, everybody does solar or heat pumps or batteries for different reasons. I hear the carbon footprint piece. I hear the return on investment piece. Twice we have put solar systems in that were good return on investments for people who wanted to keep up with the Joneses, and that was their only choice. But I made sure that it was the right thing to do because I need to sleep at night. But how do we engage them? We set up at home shows. We set up at the flower show. We set up at the fair, and we do not want to sell anybody anything. We want to be that entity in the community that people can feel like they can ask questions of us and they're not getting salesy responses. And I think that's why people come to us. It seems to be what they say. So I feel like when you asked, how do we engage people? The way that we do it is by being available and making sure that when somebody calls us and has questions about what we do, we set aside time that isn't rushed, but I don't linger either. So that's how we engage people, I guess.
It's funny you said you didn't have the answer, because that to me really captures it pretty well. Like, that listening piece and that trusted advisor piece, right? That you see when people have a sense that they're getting sold something, they're not drawn in to that conversation, right? They sort of pull back. And so, but then, like, I think the question for us is how we want to move quickly. And boy, how do you do that kind of listening, give that kind of attention to one another that we all need to do in a fast-paced way?
I think it's really, really important to me as well that we address climate change and we work on our industry, but that nobody feels like it's being shoved down their throat and that they should do something. They could, but we try really hard to avoid the should attitude because it just turns people off. And I think engaging people in the future is a really fragile thing. And I want to make sure that they are engaged and continue to be interested in that. They know that they can brainstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a similar model as Chris does, is that we don't like to come off salesy. We really try to, if anything, like sell the lifestyle of living more zero waste. Like, we study a lot of human behavior. People get really weird about waste, especially when we were setting up stuff at events. Even right here at Hula, where we set up all the waste diversion stuff, people will kind of hide where they're throwing their waste because they're embarrassed by it. But for us, it's we want them to feel empowered. We say that we create engaging educational content that empowers them, and really building that culture of sustainability. So when we go into companies, we're doing workshops and activities and challenges first, so people get excited about sustainability. We rarely talk about climate change because we meet people where they're at in the discussion, because more often than not, people can agree that the amount of waste that we're producing isn't right, especially like when they see all the trash everywhere and all the trash in the oceans. That's usually that common thread that we could talk about. But if we go in as consultants and say that we're going to be doing this, this, and that, it just creates low stakeholder buy-in and doesn't create that ripple effect that we want. So when we build that culture of sustainability through education, as Chris mentioned, and also Kristin, they get bigger buy-in, then they start taking more sustainable practices into their everyday life. And that's when we really get to see the change. On top of that, they know their departments better than anyone else, better than us coming in and trying to make their process more efficient. So then we get feedback from people in the warehouse and in the sales area and the kitchen, and then we could optimize and make more efficient and reduce waste in that department instead of just coming in. It's really cool when we get to see department heads or departments or just staff members come back and show us how they started looking at waste differently. Again, we're all about reinventing our relationship with waste. But yeah, at the source of it is education and finding more inclusive language to use so that people don't feel like they're being targeted, as Chris said, and left out of the conversation, because we're all in this together. So finding the common thread is what works for us.
Thank you. So Paul, I'm curious to get your answer to this. You know, when I think of packetized energy, I think of something that's actually kind of complicated. Like how do you bring that to sort of a consumer or a participant? How do you talk about sort of what you do in a way that people understand?
Yeah, I mean, our complicated name aside, I'm also actually a user of the efficiency programs. I've done a number of projects in my house. You know, the one thing that I've really observed is that we make it way too complicated for people to say yes to this stuff. And one of my real passions is figuring out how can we make it as easy to get a new home energy system or a efficiency project or whatever it is, as it is for me to push a button and get somebody to take me to the airport on a car. Like, my phone is this incredibly simple thing that provides me access to everything. And so we've, really made a lot of innovation in other sectors in providing easy electronic access to almost everything. But I don't think we've done that very well for energy yet. And so one of the things that we're really passionate about is how can we make it just incredibly easy for people to say yes, so that we clearly articulate the value of how you can decarbonize by, getting a new EV or getting a heat pump for your home, but then just make that process, that next step of actually getting that system going and getting the rebates and all that process super duper easy. So I think that's the piece that I think is we really need to work on is, obviously creating the financial program so there's good incentives for doing so, but then also making it really super easy for people to say yes.
So I want to reference an early question here, which is like, as we think about climate, and this is true of all of our propositions, you really can't look at any of them in isolation. One of our challenges in this, as we structure this summit, is that we have themes to these conversations and we put them in boxes, but the reality is they all interconnect to one another. So let's give that an example. Housing. So much of a conversation in Vermont right now is around how to create more affordable housing, especially with some of the pressure we've seen in our real estate market right now. I wonder if any of you have a perspective on that. Like how does the work that you do connect to how we create more high quality and livable housing for folks? Anybody have some thoughts there?
I actually do. We have customers that come to us and say, I'm interested in solar, but my plan is within 5 years, I'm going to be out of this place. What's it going to do for the next homeowner? And what I see happening is the next homeowner calls me 5 years down the road and says, I need to understand this system. And then they go, oh, really? I'm not going to have to pay so much for my power bill. And I'm making a difference in my, like, people understand the general idea of solar, but they don't have an in-depth understanding of it. So when I look at housing and the market and what we're doing in any way, it kind of seems interesting to me that it's almost an afterthought, but some people do think about it ahead of time when they're know that they've got a plan that they're going to have the house for only a certain period of time, and they still move forward.
Kristin, I wonder about you, just to draw you into this, like as you think about a household and the affordability piece, how do you think about that at GMP?
So cost can definitely be a barrier for a lot of Vermonters. And, there's been some good questions about, for example, the new EAN report came out, showed that in order to reach our state decarbonization goals, we have to triple the number of heat pumps by 2025. And, how do we get there? And I think one of the ways that we can get there is incentives do help people move. And especially when we can target incentives to helping low to moderate income families make this decision. Because it's really tough to have, Chris talked about those conversations, and that's part of it, is like these in-depth conversations where you've built a trusted relationship and people know that why you're there is to help. And so when it comes to housing stock, it's really tough to talk to a family and say, well, the good news is you're going to save money when you're using your heat pumps, but then there'll be a little more cost in other months, but over the year it balances out. So I think we have to look at aggressive ways of targeting funding to help families and folks who are single, whoever their family makeup is, to make this transition faster. And I think when we think about what happened to us during the pandemic, most folks, obviously some still had to work, essential workers, but a lot of people I know worked from home. What became essential during working from home? Broadband became essential when you either had a spouse or children, or again, even if you lived alone, high-speed internet became essential. You know why high-speed internet is essential? If we want to ask people to decarbonize and to leverage electric vehicles and to leverage heat pumps and all the controllability that can come to help drive down costs, because we haven't talked about this actually creates a more sustainable, cost-effective future. Because if we're able to manage the energy usage in a way where people aren't using power the most on these dirty, expensive days, it saves all of our customers money. All of these programs that are being done through the utilities, and there's a lot of other great utilities across Vermont who are leading the way here, is that it drives down costs. 100% of that value is returned to customers. And so getting people into these other cleaner sources helps lower costs. We need to eliminate the upfront barrier, deliver broadband that enables them to have the connected EV, deliver the ability to have, a smart panel in their home on a pilot we just launched where like they can connect everything. So a lot of home panels today, Jon, can't accept all of the innovations that are required. So when we think about our housing stock, we're doing outreach to builders, because I guess if you're in Chittenden County, there's like a building boom happening. How can we enable these homes to be efficient and to be able to accept a lot of this smart electrification that's needed? But the thing is, like, we have the tools now. So it can all come together. It just takes the coordination that's required, because then we'll have more resiliency, more reliability. And by the way, we'll have an energy future that will eventually lower costs for customers.
Somebody mentioned workforce development, and I think that's, we don't want to leave this conversation without talking about that. So much of this requires people on the ground doing things often with their hands, right? Like in one capacity or another. And frankly, I think there's apprehension about the bottleneck that we have in terms of people to do this work. And so just curious, in particular, I think Paul and Chris, you might have perspectives as folks who've probably had to do some hiring in this field. What does that look like for you all?
Yeah, I would really highlight two areas that I think are in incredibly short supply right now. One is in the trades. And so, in order to electrify everything and create more efficient housing stock, we need a lot of really talented people who work with their hands and can do a really great job in modernizing homes and businesses. And so I think that I'm not a specialist in this, but I know that like Vermont Technical College is doing some awesome things about this. We just need more programs like that really bring people to Vermont and get them set up with efficient, smart houses and put them to work in helping to modernize our homes and businesses. And the other piece of it is in software and technology. And so it is incredibly difficult to hire really top talent in the software area. Vermont is a great place to live. Honestly, people love the concept of living here, but we're just kind of off the radar. And so we really need a concerted effort in finding attracting software talent to come and live in Vermont. And really, I would highlight groups like Vermont Code Academy that are training software engineers and really doing a great job like that. But, I think, if we can really start to build new jobs in the trades and the software area and recruit people from all over to come join us in Vermont, it could be really a big driver of the Vermont economy.
A quick follow-up for you, which is, are you in a position where you're recruiting somebody maybe to relocate to Vermont and then having to help them navigate finding the housing, finding the childcare? Like, are you running into issues around that as you?
So we have done that a couple of times, but we haven't done it most recently. I know that right now we're in this incredible housing crunch, so we haven't had to navigate that one at the moment. But I know that that's, a lot of businesses in Vermont are really struggling with that. So that's something that, we need more awesome clean energy houses that are available for people to rent. Yeah.
How about you, Chris? As you, if you need to staff up, are you able to find folks?
It's rough. What we are finding is that when we get really great employees, all of a sudden, somebody from a different industry is hearing how wonderful they are and stealing them out from under us. That's happened 3 times in the last 4 years. I don't know if we just raise them up right or what, but and then finding good quality folks that want to learn, that want to work with their hands and be outside doing the work that we do. We're a really small family business, and when someone comes on with us, we treat them like they're part of our family. And when they leave us, they're still part of our family. But finding good quality people to work is really difficult. And during the pandemic, it's been even more so because people have, in my opinion, and it's my personal opinion, but I've also been told this by interviewees, they make more if they stay home. That's not the case anymore, but it was a case not that long ago. And that's one of my drives, is to try to make sure that our youth do understand that there are jobs waiting for them. We have a gentleman who is starting for us tomorrow, who has not graduated high school yet, but he's going to the Hannaford Career Center here in Middlebury on Thursdays and Fridays. And so on Thursdays and Fridays for the rest of the school year, he's coming to work with us, and tomorrow's day 1 for him. And we are thrilled to have him, and he's got some construction background. We would rather train someone to do things without cutting corners and doing things the right way, treating people's property as if they were their own, but maybe a little more important. These are all skills that we would rather train. So finding people who are trainable sometimes is difficult, and just when we put an ad out there, just getting people to answer it, it's hard right now. That climate of finding employees is difficult.
I want to reference something that I'm reading in chat and also in the Q&A a little bit, which is, does our new future simply look like sort of what we have now, but electrified, let's say, as an example, or do we need to think a little more fundamentally about things like our density of settlement pattern, where we are maybe not all living, not that we all do, but like, what's our pattern of living on the environment? Are we all having our own 4 walls? Are we having some shared living, sort of more compact settlement? Sometimes I think I hear a concern that we're not getting into sort of the deep enough transformation that maybe we actually need to get into, because frankly, that conversation gets a little bit tougher and more sticky. So I don't know that you all have a platform to answer that particular question, but I want to name it because I think it's important, and I think a lot of folks think about it, including me and folks who are participating here. And I guess give anyone a chance to sort of respond to that that sort of more fundamental sort of question about what change lies ahead for us.
Yeah, I could speak on that. There's a lot of good points that came up that I'll try to reference back. For us, I do believe that there needs to be way more aggressive action. I love being in Vermont. I feel like we pat ourselves on the back a little bit too much with some of the regulations that we have when they're not binding. Sometimes I do feel like it's more of a PR thing, that we're like, oh, we have this plastic bag ban, we're doing this and that, and it gets out all over the country. But then in reality, there's still a lot of gaps that are not there. Like, it's just like people put out this stuff and then there's no system to support them, which is what we saw with Act 148. And then now with the composting, it's like, how do people now figure that out? That's where like we are trying to work with the community shared systems. On top of that, going back to affordable housing, we believe that the landlords should be responsible for paying heat. And the reason for that being is for those low income communities and marginalized communities, they are typically living in housing that is super inefficient. And now they have to pay for the extra heat in there. If landlords were expected to pay for the heat, they would optimize and make it more efficient within the house, because all of this burden shouldn't be going on low income and marginalized communities. That tends to happen also in the waste sector. People, it comes, even though it came from marginalized communities, the zero waste movement, it tends to get whitewashed, and people in privilege say that like, oh yeah, I've been living zero waste, I have no packaged food, this and that, and then look down or compare to other communities, but they live in a food desert. So all they have access to is junk food that's at a liquor store, convenience store. So looking at those fundamental changes, like how can we start at the root and not continue to pass the burden on to certain communities that it really is not their fault. Like, we should be looking at the systems wholly and creating those community based systems. In addition, also with affordable housing, when units are going up, we've worked with construction companies and navigating ways. It just takes a little bit extra planning to divert the stuff and really make sure that we are fine tuning the materials that are being used. If we could outsource some refurbished ones, and what we could do with the leftover materials, if we can make it into stuff, benches, tables that are going to be used within it. So for us, long-winded answer, but it's the pat on the back thing really irks me sometimes, and sorry for my non-professional language, and that is people from a certain status tend to like pat themselves on the back for doing these things, but really they are the ones polluting the most or creating the most energy. So they have a big house, large carbon footprint, but then they got all this fancy stuff and now they, you know, are energy efficient. And then you have the low income communities, marginalized communities that, yeah, their house isn't efficient, but why should like be putting the burden on them when we have this overconsumption lifestyle? And again, that waste. So like we have all of these products that are now wasted. Did they get recycled properly and compared to the stuff that are in other houses? So that's, again, that's why I feel like waste is at the source of things, because it could just amplify over and over and it's connected to the stuff. So I'll stop talking.
I think you're highlighting a good tension though, which is sometimes do the actions that we think are adding up, do they in fact add up? How are we clear-eyed about what needs to happen, and honest with ourselves and one another about what steps we need to take? Do others have other sort of reflections on this point of like sometimes what feels like the small changes versus some of the more big or fundamental changes?
I think some of them can happen in concert. So there's an interesting chat happening around living in downtowns and sort of what it means to live in a downtown from a resource perspective. And I think, there's a conversation around electric bicycles as an option, as a mode of transportation for folks who maybe needs to go to a grocery store. And so I think there's a lot of options that have to happen in concert. So I think, I think the expectation that, as someone who grew up in Vermont, that you're going to take everyone and move them into a downtown is also not sustainable. I think the notion that we need to build smarter and closer together and more efficient with weatherized housing stock that is closer to where people need to get their groceries and work, I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I think it has to happen in concert. And you're right, Jon, this is always there was an elephant reference. And so now on the chat, so I have an elephant stuck in my mind, but it's the elephant in the room because yes, if you're going to choose a fossil fuel vehicle or an electric vehicle, there is a better choice to make. If you're going to choose a plastic bag versus a reusable bag, yes, there is a better choice to make. But how can we even rewind the conversation to have a more systemic change, right? I think that's what some people are craving is like, what are we doing for bike lanes? What are we doing in terms of creating housing stock that's affordable? Because again, not much in housing is happening in Montpelier, but what I see in Chittenden County probably would not be considered affordable for most folks. And that needs to happen in concert. To me, I see it as an and, because we need to make progress today. So we have the electrical system we know there's climate change. How do we create resiliency zones where people can have power when the grid goes down because they need it because they're working from home or their kids are maybe doing courses from home? That is essential. But then how do we want to think about grouping home and community in a different way? And climate change will require us to think differently moving forward.
Well, and I think just to articulate one apprehension I'm reading is, are our little steps adding up in the right direction towards those big systemic changes? I hear some apprehension and read some apprehension here in the Q&A about like, well, what if we're going down this shorter path that feels like the right path, but actually when we look at the endpoint and zoom out, again, to reference some of our other propositions, one of them is around this need for a more holistic statewide planning effort. And to me, this conversation is one of those examples of that, of is there that vision of where we need to go such that the steps that we take add up to that? I mean, from a grid standpoint, you all have to be thinking about that, right? A grid, it's like this massive machine, it all needs to fit together. So in a way, that's like a little microcosm of the larger question. Paul, it looks like you maybe want to get a word in there.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and like I agree with everything that's being said here, but one of the things I think is really important to note that's true of Vermont, and it's becoming true of all places all over the country, is that not every geography is the same. And so we absolutely, I think high density housing and really creative uses of communities is absolutely the right thing to do in Chittenden County, and we should be really pushing that where we've got some density. In the northeastern part of the state, we've got this unique circumstance where there's more wind and solar than the grid can actually handle. And so energy efficiency investments, particularly on the electric side at least, are not really getting the payoff that you would expect because we're throwing away wind and solar as it is. And so we need to be doing things differently than what we're doing in other places. And so, in the Northeast Kingdom, people are going to drive a lot. So we should think about how can we electrify transportation? And how can we create, energy storage solutions that can move energy across time? But I guess I would really emphasize that Vermont is a diverse place. We've got different solutions that need to be applied in different locations. We really need to remember that as we embark on these creative solutions.
Excellent. I want to start to get into some like shorter questions that I see in the Q&A just to try to answer. So Marina, somebody asked a question, do you work with municipalities as they think about waste? Is that something you've done?
Yeah, so I was actually typing in the chat to say to Paul, yeah, I totally agree that you can't pass something that's like for the whole state when every county is different in terms of municipalities and what they're accepting too, but also just their access to certain resources. And is it more sustainable to be bringing resources in or taking them out or leaving them there? So yeah, we work closely with municipalities, CSWD, Casella, and when we were in the event sector before COVID, and we travel around the country setting up zero waste systems for large scale events. And we always toured the compost facility and the recycling facility before the event, so we could see what they are actually taking, and like for the compost, what they prefer to get, and then same with recyclables. And then we would use that information to then pass it to the food vendors, the sponsors, everyone, because we didn't want useless crap to happen. But that's also where I noticed you have to provide more solutions, because I was banning all of these products for sponsors because I didn't allow them to give out koozies and stickers and like all this stuff I knew would end up on the ground. So they providing them solutions on still like to highlight their brand. But whatever the municipalities didn't want there, like we tried to get rid of it, because they already are dealing with all the contaminated waste. And since there's no regulations on the word recyclable, compostable, or the recycling sign, as a consumer, you're throwing stuff in unintentionally that you think is recyclable or compostable when in fact it's not. So that's something from the federal level that we want to see, is more regulations on what could actually be on the packaging so that consumers can make better decisions. Like box water, for instance, is not better. It's actually worse than plastic bottles. So that's not completely state, but goes off to policy, and it changes from county to county. What's accepted in the Northeast Kingdom is not what is accepted in Chinnon County, and vice versa.
You know, I see a question, Kristin, I don't know if you can answer this. There's a 500 kW cap, I think, in terms of how much, well, I'll let you answer that. I'm a step removed from it, but do you have a sense of what the status of that is? I think there's a sense from some municipalities that they would like to participate in net metering beyond that 500 kW cap. So
there's a lot of other state programs that can help folks look at the kilowatts and what they want to do beyond 500. For example, I think Encore was working on a direct to Middlebury approach that would have been 5 megawatts. And so if the person asking questions maybe wants to connect with Encore or me, or look at other alternatives about why the state policy caps it at 500, because then beyond that, there's other programs where you can do either direct PPAs or direct power to a consumer community that you want to benefit. And I think part of everything that is juggled as we move forward aggressively to a new energy future is how do we want to do it in a way that is cost effective and sustainable for every single customer. And so obviously there's sensitivity to driving up costs for some, and I think that's why the state policy is the way it is. But all of the utilities are committed to being 100% renewable, far ahead of all state goals, relying on local in-state renewable generation and regional generation in a way that's going to benefit the economy in the region. But again, happy to follow up with that. I'm trying to track all the Q&As in the chat. We have a very energized crew, which I actually kind of love, because like usually you do these things and you don't know what people are thinking. Well, the good news is we know what you're thinking, and it's awesome. It's like, I feel like it's like another benefit of this, so.
I share that appreciation. I see a question in here about, we've talked a little bit about real estate. A lot of people over the last 18 months have decided to make Vermont a more permanent home than they were before the pandemic. Has that changed your all's work? How are we reaching those people and encouraging them? That moment of new residency might be an opportunity. So I wonder, particularly maybe for Chris and Kristin, have you experienced a change as people now call Vermont home?
So I'll just jump in quickly on this. So in Vermont, because of our typical declining population and because of our efficiency efforts, the actual usage, people call it load, but the energy usage has been steadily declining in Vermont. And why that matters is because you have a fixed system to maintain for safety and reliability that is still the backbone of a lot of these innovations as we transition to this new energy future rapidly. That creates these zones of resiliency. We're working with about 3 or 4 communities to do this work, including Pantons, which is going to go online momentarily, around microgrid, first of its kind, storage, solar, really critical to move forward. In the most recent census, we saw for the first time that there was a population bump, which I don't think any of us have seen in a long time. And we are not seeing that right now because due to the pandemic, there actually was, and you probably saw this in the news as well, you know, we have residential and commercial industrial classes. Some of those customers were actually using less energy because they were shut down, while others were using more. So we haven't seen that play out yet, but we are prepared for that to come and to happen if we do become like a permanent, where folks are here more. And we do a lot of planning around the grid. As folks probably know, this is a very intelligent group of participants, but we do grid planning every 3 years in an integrated resource plan that takes into account all different modeling in terms of low, medium, and high usage, low, medium, and high population. And we're just about to update that. The good news is that with some really important critical infrastructure investments, which we're trying to get through federal funding that's happening with ARPA, all this federal funding that's available, we're able to handle that in Vermont. Have not seen yet the increase happen yet, other than we have a lot of move in and move outs that keep our call center very busy with folks coming in and of homes and coming out of homes. A lot of sales.
How about you, Chris? Have you noticed it in your work at all?
Where we see people that are moving in and out of homes is transitions of systems that, excuse me, that we installed, or when people will call for site checks and quotes, reaching out to those people, excuse me, reaching out to those people independently is not something that we have done in any way.
I want to come back, I think, to this, I guess, this equity question, which is how are we building our programs to be sure they're accessible to Vermonters? I think we've talked about it a little bit, but I think it's really fundamental as we think forward. So I feel like it's worth coming back to. Do we, and to some degree, maybe a related question is around the market. I think we think about the market as a way to drive adoption and incentives and disincentives to do that. Do you all, any of you, have some thoughts on how to design those incentives and disincentives in such a way that we're really boosting up the circumstances for some of those who struggle to pay their bills?
So I want to jump in on this, if that's okay, because maybe others also have thoughts, but I want to go back in history to like the 1930s and the Great Depression. One of the most amazing things that we did as a country was to create the rural electrification program. And that program brought affordable energy to millions of people that wouldn't have otherwise had it, and really transformed our economy in a lot of ways. And, I feel like we're at a moment where we need another rural electrification system because, wind and solar are going to get located much more so in rural areas than they are in urban areas, just because of geography. And, particularly in Vermont, it is a lot of the transportation and the heating load is in rural areas. And those people are, bearing the burden of the cost of that. And, much more so than people in urban locations. And so I think we really need to focus in Vermont, and I think we could become a model for the entire nation of what a clean rural electrification could look like. And so that's something that we're really passionate about, creating the technology infrastructure to do that, making it really easy for people to say yes to clean, rural, efficient electrification. But I think that also really ties into equity because, it's our rural residents in Vermont who, in many ways are least able to afford new clean energy solutions. And I think there's a lot of feeling that a lot of the new energy development is benefiting the urban dwellers like myself, not, not rural Vermonters. And so that's something that I think we really need to think carefully about. How do we create these systems to benefit rural Vermont?
Others have a perspective on this question?
I have a little bit of a perspective on it, but it's kind of a bittersweet in a reality. I think that the way that the rebates have been structured recently, where there are different income tiers that get more of an incentive, more of a rebate, have been really, really helpful. Making those, so there's instant rebates that come off our distributor invoice that the customer, the homeowner, then doesn't even have to come up with up front. And then there's mail-in rebates. And I wonder, and this is just me throwing it out there, I wonder if there are ways to change those platforms in any way so that the income-based rebates, and I know they come from Green Mountain Power's customers in this particular case that I'm talking about, because that's mostly my customers. The income-based ones, where they have to front the money and then get it back, is sometimes a difficulty. Sometimes it's a game changer, meaning it just can't happen. But I think when we talk about making these products available to the lower income people so that they can begin to save money and better their carbon footprint, I don't know if the way that we're doing it now is the best way, or if maybe there isn't a better way that could be brainstormed to do that so that the people don't have to front it so much up front. But also, last summer when Green Mountain Power doubled the incentive for the summer months, as an installer, we got so flooded and did not have the staff to take care of what we needed to take care of, and could not grow in a responsible way at the level that we wanted to. So we lost jobs, and we know that there were many customers that just plain didn't have a heat pump installed because they wanted us to do it, but it couldn't be done in the time frame that it needed to be done in. And so they just got frustrated and walked away. So this goes back to that piece of bringing education to our youth to make sure that they're going into the trades and taking care of all of us that are no longer in our youth, and making sure that they get the education that they need to at least spur the little spark of, geez, I want to know more about being in this industry, or I want to do this with my life. So those are my 2 points on that. Thanks.
Excellent. You know, I'm just going to summarize them back because I feel like both of them were important. One is like having people able to sort of realize an incentive at the point of sale where they don't have to pay and then get a rebate. Like that, from a structural standpoint, you look at like, and let's name something that's even more significant, which is structuring certain things as tax credits when people don't have the tax liability to benefit. So that's another, sorry, I've got a kid and a smoke alarm going off in the base downstairs. We got a little bit of a situation going on in the background. This is the joys of Zooming from home. But then that other point about how do we level out the work, right? People describe it as the solar coaster. The on again, off again nature of incentives can be really challenging for contractors, can be really challenging for consumers. How do you plan and try to have a more sustained path as opposed to sort of an on again, off again path? I feel like those are 2 important points. Kristin, I don't know if you had any sort of reflections to share.
No, it's great to, I sort of want to be like, I wish we could sit down for tea or coffee because it's great to hear this feedback. We would have extended. So we, again, this is like a minor point in the broader topic. So I don't want to like get too focused on it. The reason we increased rebates for 3 months was feedback from installers and businesses who were saying they were very concerned during the pandemic that people wouldn't be taking this action. And so we did a 3 month. It turns out, I guess it was too much of a good thing or too much of not the right thing. I don't, so it's good to hear that feedback, and I think what we hear from customers is a combination, but I really like the focus on how can we reduce the combination of getting the rebate once it's installed versus going up up front with our electric bike. It's done at the point of sale. With the electric vehicles, it's often done at the point of sale with participating businesses. So that might be something to pursue as like a good takeaway from this. What is the best way to do it? We increased the incentives during the pandemic because, quite frankly, we were worried about the pandemic and its impacts on businesses like Chris's, and that folks weren't going to be taking action. And then it turns out, I guess, we had the opposite, which was that too many people were taking action. So I'd rather err on the side of too many people took action than we didn't do anything and it stayed like this. And so with the rebates, they've been a pretty continual, steady thing. We're going to have them through the end of the year. And I think it would be valuable to look at state incentives as well, because it does help. It really does help. And that moved the market in a really dramatic way. And it taught us a lot of lessons, and I really appreciate the feedback because, you know, it spurs sort of more ideas of how can we fix things and do things better.
Well, and let me just say, I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I think a lot of those state and federal incentives are structured the same way, right? This is not just about sort of our utility-based incentives. And so I think it's really for, as we design state programs and federal programs as well, thinking about some of those components too.
And can I just jump in briefly?
Quickly, because we're right at our time.
So briefly, I just want to say that Green Mountain Power does an amazing job with those rebates, and not every power company does the same thing. And it would be really nice to have a statewide program instead of an individual program. Thanks.
You know, we pride ourselves at VCRD for finishing on time. So I'm going to do that, which means a wrap up in 1 minute. I really want to thank Chris, Kristin, Marina, Paul for participating in this conversation. You all bring really important perspectives, and we really appreciate your willingness to get out here in front of an audience on a really hot topic. Really want to appreciate our participants, our audience as well. I don't feel like I even scratched the surface of the Q&A, frankly. I think there's a lot still on the table. Really appreciate the perspective you all brought. You brought some very good and deep questions, and fundamental ones that we really need to continue to think about. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your participation. And I think we are going to wrap up here because we've got more summit to go. So great.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks for the awesome
Thanks,
question.
Cindy.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
everybody.
John, I saved all the Q&A for you, so I'll send that off.
Awesome. That's great. That's going to be really helpful for us. Thank
Okay,
you.
see you guys.
Be
Bye,
well.
Marina. See you
Bye,
soon.
everybody.
Thank you.